Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of Genre Blender, the podcast that celebrates all things storytelling. My name is Kris,
And I'm Shayla.
and today's topic is fanfiction, opening gateways for new authors, which is an interesting topic. I was just talking to Shayla off the recording, and letting her know my feelings about, or my initial feelings about fan fiction, which have been challenged more recently coming into the book sphere. But Ryan does send their apologies. They are unwell today, but I'm very fortunate to have a guest star on the Genre Blender podcast. So I'll throw over to Shayla to introduce herself and the worlds that she's part of.
So I'm Shayla. I write urban fantasy horror fiction as Shayla Morgansen. Is my latest book, Mythos Unbound. I have been publishing for the last 10 years, but also during that time, I've been, in my personal life, I've been studying my PhD in creative writing pedagogy and publishing studies, specifically around fanfiction, long-running fanfiction communities as communities of practice, where writers learn the skills of professional writers and either continue to use those as a hobby or, in some instances, move into indie and traditional publishing spheres.
It's kind of wild that we're seeing, I mean, to me, and we'll get into it in a little bit, but that we are seeing some quite big fan fiction communities pick up works of fan fiction, and you have to change names and things like that because a lot of time those fan fiction works are the names of the characters in certain media. But yeah, like there's one I'll talk about in a minute where a huge fan fiction community that is now getting published and has a deal with Orbit. So they are being picked up, and it's kind of incredible. I do want to mention before we jump into today's topic that Mythos Unbound, we are doing a giveaway for it. So, Shayla, can you tell us a little bit more about the story inside this beautiful book with its sprayed edges and its gold foiling? This is the Kickstarter edition, and Shayla was gracious enough to send me two, so we are going to be giving one away today.
Yeah, so this novel was the result of my husband finding out how many words of fan fiction I had archived on the internet.
How
And
many words do we
so
get to know?
so it would be over 1,000,000 words.
Damn.
One on its own is 600,000. And one that's coming up after it, it's not the work in progress, I think is about 450,000. Plus there are a bunch of smaller works as well. So he discovered this, and he knew that I had this as a hobby, but he hadn't realized how prolific it was. And at the same time, I was maybe half, 2/3 of the way through the writing of my first series and was putting out a book maybe every 2 or 3 years. He's like, you just put down 600,000 words, which is the equivalent of 6 of your novels in 18 months. Maybe you could be utilizing that time and those ideas toward your own original writing. And I was really clear in our discussion afterward, like actually they are for a different purpose. Like when I'm writing fan fiction, I'm not trying to achieve what I'm trying to achieve when I write my original books. They are for, it is still to be read by my audience, but I'm not writing it so that, that I can then sit and pore over it for the next 2 years, editing and, going through the beta process and trying to create this perfect commercial product. I'm kind of just playing, and there's an ease that comes with that, and there are a lot of, there's a lot of satisfaction that comes from fan fiction that I don't get from writing my original works. But the conversation did really inspire me in that he pointed out that the reviews that I had were really positive, and there were people who wanted to know whether I had a background in forensics, which I don't, because I had done a lot of research into it, and that they believed that was kind of there. And he said, well, you have now all this basically useless information stocked up in your head. Could that not go into something else? And then the seeds of this book was kind of planted. Yeah.
So tell us what the story is about. Because I was just, you don't have forensic background. Evie sure does. It's this
It sure
character
does.
here. Yeah.
So from that, I really deconstructed what I had been playing with in fanfiction for the previous 10 years or more of my young adult life, and realized that what I had written that I got the most satisfaction from, or what had gotten really good traction in those communities, were works where I had multiple points of view, where I had non-romantic pairs that had an interesting power dynamic. There may have been a romantic element, for instance, like X-Files, Mulder and Scully, but unless you're writing a romance piece, if you're writing a longer form work like what I do, like a case file, there's a lot else going on in that particular relationship beyond their romance. They're a very complex pair, and I also love magic, supernatural, spaceships. I struggle to write anything that doesn't have one of those elements. So that kind of laid the groundwork for this. And I ended up with a story about an FBI profiler sister and a mythology scholar brother who also sees the supernatural and sees monsters moving around society, and he hunts them, but is trying to keep his family out of that because he knows that they're not the same, and they end up on the same case. So then we're moving between the two perspectives as they unravel clues separately and then kind of come together, but always at the same time trying to edge the other one out for their own safety. Yeah, that
There
was
was a definite. There was a real. I've had the pleasure of reading it. Just full disclosure to the audience. So I read this one as an ARC, and then I backed the Kickstarter, and I have this beautiful edition, which you can also get if you enter the giveaway, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But what I really liked about the book, just to I guess praise it some more, is that we have both a found and a real family dynamic in this book, and they play off each other really well. Personally, I love Finn, and I can't wait to see more of Finn as we go through the series. But there are a lot of throws and a lot of comp titles when we look at Mythos Unbound and taking some of that inspiration from your own fan fiction work. Do you have one that stands out to you? Would be a comp title for this?
um I really think it's three. Can I use three?
Yes, that's fine. I was like, one's
Thank
fairly
you.
limiting.
It is. Well, the two fandoms that I wrote in that I drew the most from were X-Files, which is also my research area, and Dexter, which was the fandom I came from prior to X-Files. And I met amazing people there who were like, if you love the dynamic between Dexter and Deb, these siblings who are kind of both telling the story in different ways, but pushing and pulling in terms of the narrative. And she's, blind to what he's doing, and he, you would love Mulder and Scully, like they've got all this chemistry. And so, one fandom led to the next, and you just kind of never get out. But the other fandom love that I haven't personally written in, but which I've read and which I engage in as more of a lurker, is Supernatural.
I was going
Yeah.
to say if I picked one out, it'd be Supernatural. But I also don't have connections to X Files or Dexter. I think I watched like 3 episodes of Dexter. I'm just not a big TV watcher. How do you feel as a side tangent about the new series? Because there's two, isn't there? There's
I
like a young Dexter, and then there's
Yeah.
a
And
new
then
one
there's an
coming
old
out with the
one.
original cast.
So they did an event series a couple of years ago that had the original cast that was like a follow on. I didn't watch that. Some of my fandom friends did and said that they were satisfied with it. I just wasn't in a time that like I think when it came out, I just had my daughter, and so my life just didn't really have the room for binging
That's
a
fair
TV show with
enough. Yeah.
some of those things. Yeah. So I didn't watch it. Also, the reason that I wrote the fan fiction was that I was really moved in a negative way by the final season of the original show. and had to obviously write 600,000 words of fan fiction to resolve those feelings. And when they released this new show, this new event series, I just felt like I didn't need that version of their future because I'd already played it out in my work. However, I have watched, been watching the prequel series. I've been enjoying that. That kind of interferes less with my headcanon, and confirms and supports some of the ideas I had about the characters, as opposed to moving them all forward into a future that I wasn't happy with.
That's interesting, and I will dive into headcanon when we jump into the main topic. But I do want to mention that we do have a copy of Mythos Unbound to give away, so thank you, Shayla, for sending that one to me. If you want to enter the giveaway for this, what I will ask you to do is to please subscribe to the channel here on YouTube for Genre Blender, or whatever medium you are following Genre Blender in, whether that be Apple or Spotify, and to answer a question for us down in the comments, which Shayla will give us now.
We want to know what your favorite fandom is, so pop that down in the comments.
I feel like this could be loaded. People tell us what their favorite fandom is depending on how true to their core values and goals that the fandom lies. So yes, if you do want to enter, it is an international giveaway, so please do go ahead wherever you are from and put your answers down below. In terms of announcing the winner, this will likely be in the next podcast episode, which does get filmed on March the 2nd and will likely come out later on in that week, so keep an eye out for that. But make sure you are subscribed and tell us what your favorite fandom is down below. So jumping into the episode, Shayla, thank you again for being a guest here. We do normally start all of our episodes with an update called Read, Write and Play. No, Read, Watch, Play. I mean, we are writing. We can do a writing update as well. What are you writing at the moment? Where we talk about maybe anything that we're reading, anything that we're watching in terms of like film or television, and also any games that we might have been playing. So what has been consuming your life as of recent?
I just finished a beta read for the hugely underrated talent of Katie Morgan. She's an indie author in the States. She writes romance within a sci-fi thriller setting called the Compound series. I just finished reading the third in the trilogy that isn't released yet, and I just have the biggest hangover from these characters because I have loved them and shipped them through the previous two books. That's the first book there. Hugely underrated. I just feel like everybody needs to read this book.
I have that one. I knew the name when you said it. I have that book. Not my shelf. I think it's on my Kindle, but I do have it. And you've said some buzzwords: male romance, sci-fi. I'm in.
So sci-fi in I don't know what would be the right terminology for this type of sci-fi. It's a very grounded sci-fi, like X-Men. As in it's here in our world. The sci-fi is more like in the powers that people have, and our lead character is an empath that's being used to interrogate like political prisoners, and then we've got like this jailbreak kind of storyline, and then just the most lovable, noble love interest with all the muscles, and just bring him here.
I mean, it sounds fun. Like, there's no shame on this podcast. Getting a book hangover from a beta read is pretty powerful. So that's props to the author.
Yeah. I haven't played anything because I have a 2-year-old. So I don't do any gaming. I have a 2-year-old and a PhD to finish. So anytime I'm not with my 2-year-old, I am working on either one of my novels or trying to get my thesis finished because I'm sick of being a PhD student.
Yes, I can imagine that takes up quite a lot of your life. Rachel, my wife, has just started talking about murmurings of potential PhD-dom in the future. It's like, do you want to give yourself 12 months or what are we doing? Have you watched anything recently?
My toddler started dropping her day nap, which meant she fell asleep earlier, which meant we got to watch a movie for like the first time in 2 years, and we watched the Barbie movie.
I still haven't seen it, to be honest, the newest one.
Yeah, it was that one.
I remember the kids ones back in the day. My sister used to watch them, and I was like watching the cartoon ones or the animated ones.
Yeah. No, I've not seen those, unfortunately. Perhaps that needs to go on the list somewhere after like the new seasons of Dexter and
Yeah, that's it, right? There's just so little time in the day to like fit all of these things in. I tend to read the most, and like at the moment with our business just starting, and I offer free beta reads. They're limited spots because they're free, and I've had 4 this month. So like my whole life has been taken up with beta reads and trying to get them the product back to the authors. So I just finished a beta read for a second book called Die Slow by Morgan Shank, and I beta read the first book and I had a lot of feedback for the first book, and then I had to congratulate him on the second one because like it's just the writing is so tight and so clean compared to that that first beta read that I did for him. I sent it back and I was like, I don't have that many notes for you because it's just like you've already given me a fairly polished product. Here's a couple of continuity things that I picked up on, but like the book is good. And I think that's so like satisfying as a beta reader to give back and be like, you've done well. Here's a pat on the back to send it back. But I'm reading an arc called The Sorceress in Exile by D.H. Hoskins at the moment, which is very high intrigue political fantasy. And I love the first book called The Council of Thesia. And all we do is we sit in a council. So it basically starts after the big bad of this world has been taken care of, and now they have to figure out what to do with their lives. So it's a really interesting concept, turning some classical fantasy tropes on its head. And we just sit in a council where we've got one representative from all the different countries, all the different races, all different factions to try and make decisions. And then we just realize that politics are more dangerous than magic, which I think is the tagline of the book. And that was really entertaining to be on that end of what happens in a fantasy world that maybe you wouldn't look at all that often. So that was fun. I also haven't watched very much or played very much in the last couple of weeks. We watched a movie called Eileen a few nights ago, and that was, I want to say, a psychological drama with Anne Hathaway as the main actress, and it was weird. And I pick some weird movies, I will admit that. If I'm in charge of picking a movie, I tend to go high drama, artsy, something that makes you go, what the fuck did I just watch at the end of it? And that was definitely one of those. So I don't know that I'm allowed to pick movies for the next little bit because I did make my wife and my housemate watch it at the same time. And they just turned it off at the end and they're like, what was that? I was like, I don't know. But I had a good time while I watched it. So that was a bit of fun. But yes, I'm also trying to finish a book, and I'm going through the next round of developmental edits. So this is the second wave of edits. I sent it back to the dev editor, who has now given it back to me. So it's like draft 4, getting ready for beta readers. I've got a deadline of July that I'd like to have this book released in. So it's all getting down to how quickly can I do this well and not rush it at the
so
same time.
exciting. The book that you were talking about, that you've just the arc you've just read, sounded like a segue into a conversation about fan fiction, because so much fan fiction is like that, like picking up in the the black holes and the gaps that are left in storytelling, particularly like as you said, like most fantasy will arrive at the point where we get rid of the big bad, and maybe we'll show you like the after effects of everyone hugging and grieving, and then we just flash forward or we just cut and we're like, yep, he was gone, so it was fine. But in reality, like we in contemporary generations have lived through the periods of time where you can see that's not how war works. That's not how the world works. And
So millennials have had a
fiction,
very interesting time.
I think so. Yeah, I actually, the reason this sort of came up for me is that I recently read a paper about Tolkien fan fiction, and how critics who are literature studies scholars of Tolkien see the fan fiction generally as being not in the same style, as being counter to Tolkien's vision for that. And a big part of that, this paper argued, was that the fanfiction is being written nearly a century later, in a really different time period. And Tolkien was writing The Lord of the Rings during world wars that were being promised to people as, this will end all wars and then we will have peace. And so they believed that in a subconscious way, and that was coming into his writing. Whereas millennials, grandparents and great-grandparents lived through that, and the world has not ceased to have wars, and we have not solved all the problems, and there are possibly just even more problems now, or at least we're just more aware of them. And so fan fiction can be a way for not just young people, but often it gets associated with young people, for people who are feeling that disconnect between the stories they're being told and the experiences they're having as people in this world. That disconnect between the representation of people, but also of circumstances, and wanting to make sense of, well, what happens next that you're not telling me? Well, I'm going to find out for myself. And that has a lot of, a lot of meaning for the people who read it. Otherwise, no one would read it. And we know that that's not the case. So
I honestly didn't realize how big some of these communities were. And, even just mentioning prior, like a little while ago, that you've written close to 1 million words amongst two different fan fictions. Like, you've essentially written Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is, a 10-book fantasy series which has gone off, and, like, I'm sure there's fan fiction about Malazan. I feel like if you can think it, it's out there at some point. So I guess, and you've now studied this phenomenon, right, for quite a long time, and, you said X-Files is sort of where your basis is that right?
yeah.
What did you first think when you heard the term fan fiction?
So we were talking about this before we started recording, and what I realized from, and I will let you speak, of course, to it, but I think my experience was that I found fan fiction before I knew it was fan fiction. So by the time I knew that was the name of it, I was already doing it. So my friend and I in year 9 were the kind of girls who sat behind the library at lunchtime and wrote in notebooks and drew pictures of our favorite characters. And my favorite movie has always been, and probably will always be, The Matrix. And we had just watched the Matrix Reloaded. I think we both just watched that. And somehow or another, we ended up scribbling in notebooks about our adventures in the Matrix. And we created characters for ourselves, and like backstories. And then she was an art student, and she was a very talented sketch artist. And so she would draw our two personas, and wore our cool trench coats and had our slick hair and our sunglasses. We were cool, okay? So we wrote
I used to
fan
play
fiction.
cards behind a music block. I can't talk.
That would have been us without fan fiction, probably. We were writing the story down in like one of our notebooks, and it became too big for the notebook. And so I started typing it up at home. And then I just had this thought at one point. It was a little bit of like an uncomfortable thought, where I realized no one else, like I frequent bookshops, and I don't see any other like The Matrix stories. And come to think of it, I've read a lot of media tie-in novels. I love Star Wars. And I had read every like Jedi Apprentice, Young Jedi Knights, like all of the like young adult, and starting to read into the adult ones at that point too, Star Wars novelizations. But I also knew that like they all had like dude names, not girl names. I thought, okay, so they're all like professional writers. Does that mean what I'm doing is wrong? Am I not supposed to be doing this? Is this like illegal? So I went home and got out, trusty early 2000s, mid 2000s Google. And
The Yahoo search engine, whatever it was back in the day. Bing, like.
it probably was. But it didn't have sponsored stuff yet, so it just answered your question, or like you had to like put in like, keywords
Yeah.
to help with the search parameters. You couldn't actually just ask it a question, because that question didn't exist anywhere. Like no one had asked exactly that question yet. So anyway, I looked it up, and the first thing that came up was a like a very homemade kind of website called The Burning Dumpster. And I started to read it, and it was all of these, I think it was probably 4 or 5, as it turned out, as I read some more, like big name fans, or people who thought they were big name fans, who were taking other people's RPG profiles or fan fictions and like tearing them apart, like flaming them.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was really funny, but also really mean. And I thought, well, obviously a lot of people are doing this. A lot of people, enough people are doing this that there is like a standard of expectation on quality. And if you're not meeting that standard of expectation, you are fair game for ridicule. But yeah, the stories that they were ripping apart were pretty bad, which I could tell. And I was like, okay, well, my writing's better than that. So hopefully I wouldn't end up here on this burning dumpster. And then from there, like they often would link to the original story. So you could go and then you could see
Yeah.
the reviews that other people had left to show that it wasn't just them. They were the ones being the meanest, but other people had left,
At least they credited the
critical
original
reviews.
story.
They did.
Yeah.
That's very big in fandom etiquette. So yes, that goes way back. And from there, I found the archive fanfiction net, and realized like, oh, it's not just the Matrix stories. There are also Star Wars stories, and there are Star Trek stories, and there are series of unfortunate event stories, and there is everything here. But as it turned out, I was a teenager and very sheltered, so what I didn't realize there was actually a lot that was not on FanfictionNet, because FanfictionNet is more of a curated multi-fandom platform that, for instance, doesn't post works from authors that have expressed that they don't want their works there, or don't want works featuring their characters to be hosted on there, and they also don't accept works with high ratings with like high levels of sexual content and other adult themes that where they've drawn their lines. But as it turns out, all of that can just be found elsewhere on the internet, and
It's
there are other
a
archives.
wide world out there for fan fiction.
Yeah.
Your experience with fan fiction is so vastly different to my own, and like my own biases coming into fan fiction. When I first heard the term, I had no idea what it was. I did not realize that this was such a phenomenon that now I realize it is. I honestly just thought it was smart. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I honestly just thought it was people writing sexy times about characters that like didn't get together or did get together not in a way that people wanted to, and I just thought there was millions and millions of words out there of smut in fandoms. And it wasn't until sort of recently being in the book sphere and learning about popular fan fiction that had been turned into published works, whether that be self-published or published via a traditional publishing house, that I was like, oh, that people are really taking these concepts and running with it and making it original, making it their own, and linking that back to just Dexter. It didn't finish in a way that was satisfying to you. So that power to then take it back and say, I don't accept you. I can only imagine what's out there about Game of Thrones in the last season. And I'm going to write something that makes sense to me. And do you think that's sort of, I guess, the power of fan fiction and what it can give back to the communities that are writing in it?
Yeah, it's one of many powers that fan fiction affords to its writers. As we were saying, like the media, the stories that we get told in media don't always match up with our experience of reality. Partly in terms of like circumstances like happy endings after wars, but also relationships, the way that different groups are represented, given that most of the media that we watch in the West is produced in the same handful of countries by people from majority white, middle to upper class demographics, from an industry that is majority cis male, hetero. There are a lot
So
of
white dudes.
there are a lot of white dudes putting out stories that they think represent the world. And it does represent the experience of some people in the world, and it overlooks the experiences of many, many more. And some stories do that better than others. I'm not going to say that that's, every single story that's ever been written has, done an injustice to every single group. That's not the case, but many very popular stories do necessarily take one position and make the assumption that it will be relatable to more people than perhaps it does. And that includes
I think that's
smut as
a
well.
really powerful point.
Yeah.
Just being able to be more diverse for someone that, someone being able to take that meaning and create it for themselves if they're not seeing that representation. It's quite powerful. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah. Um, there are a lot of works of smut for sure on the internet and before that in magazines, which is how fanfiction was previously distributed. But prior to the internet, a lot of it was romance and smut, and most commonly between characters who were not paired up romantically or sexually in the source material. And also most commonly written by women and other people of minority groups that were not being represented at all in media prior to really like the 2010s, which is why there is a huge fandom behind Kirk and Spock, and Mulder and Scully, going back to my own source material of the X-Files. They had undeniable chemistry from the first episode, but the original creator had a vision of these characters being platonic, and yet was kind of always teasing there being something more through the episodes and through the writing of the story as it developed. And yes, we got to see that realized much later on, but the ship was sailing obviously long before that, and there were a lot of intra-fandom conflicts between fans who wanted to see that romance and fans who didn't. And not entirely, but there was quite a line drawn between male fans and female fans who, just to generalize, with a lot of the fan base that was the intended fan base, which was the educated, straight white guy who was sitting at home, having worked his week as a professional, coming home on a Friday night or Thursday night to sit and watch his episode of The X-Files and see a powerful, middle-class, white, straight guy not needing to be burdened down by his female partner, just assisted by a smart female partner. Those people don't need a romance, whereas it picked up this whole other audience, which was likewise very educated, likewise professional women. However, that female audience was reading a subtext that, having watched the show now, like in retrospect, it's very difficult to deny that subtext was there. But I don't know whether that's my reading of it, knowing, having seen it as a block, whereas watching it week by week in the 90s, I can't speak to that because I was a kid and it was on too late and the theme was too scary, so I didn't watch it till later.
I wonder if the writers know what they're doing. They must. They must know that they're writing the subtext into it.
Yeah, there were some
Just
of the writers
for people to make their own,
yeah,
nuances and stories from the scripts. Like, you've got to know. I mean, I know that I'm writing personally just in my book. It's homoerotic, but the two characters, they don't get together. And spoiler alert, they're never getting together. It is a bromance, but a very, very strong and very, very charged bromance that we have in this series. But I'm just like, the day that I get fan fiction written about the two characters is the day I've succeeded
you've
as
made
an
it.
author.
Yes.
Yeah, I know I've made it if I'm able to get fan fiction written about it.
Yeah.
So to the 37 subscribers that we have here, if you want to go and write fan fiction about my characters, please
Permission
go ahead
granted.
and do so. If permission granted, 100%, because it's not happening in the series. So if you want it, you got to write it. So we've sort of already had a chat about what you believe fanfiction can do for creators and readers. Do you have any examples of maybe what fanfiction can do for creators and readers in terms of their attachments to particular characters or settings or storylines that they don't think have
Um,
maybe ended in a satisfying way?
yeah, I think we were talking before we started recording about Kylo Ren um,
Oh
as
yes, we were.
as someone who has kind of taken on a life of his own beyond the source material. The character that we see in fan fiction is quite far removed from the Kylo Ren that we get in the source material, and not necessarily uh, different to a point of being the same, but fandom has filled in a lot of gaps that were left for that character who was um, not often given the benefit of point of view in the source material. So we got to see kind of like a disjointed journey, and also the three movies that he was in, all being written and directed by different people. Um, and having everything that went on behind the scenes in the creation of those stories. Um, so I watched the first of those movies and was not particularly taken with the characters. Some people really were. Um, I was less. I became interested in that character after watching, as many people did, this flooded the fandom, The Last Jedi. And there are many things wrong with that movie. I could sit with you for a long time unpacking what I would have done to make that movie better. What I think could
That's
have
the next series, the next fan fiction series coming out.
yeah, but it didn't upset me enough to uh, want to write 600,000 words. It just intrigued me enough that I wanted to delve into this character, and particularly the notion of the force bond between Kylo and Rey that gets established in that movie was really intriguing to me, because I, in my series prior to Mythos Unbound, have written about a pair of characters who physical descriptions are very similar to Kylo and Rey, but I wrote it a long time beforehand, so they're not based on it. If people read it and read that into it, you can see the publishing dates prior. So when I saw these two characters, I'm like, well, it's kind of like Renata and Aristea, except that my characters are a master and apprentice, and they have like this empathic, telepathic bond where like they can sense each other over long distances, and it empowers them in different ways. So because I've already written, 5 books in my series, the limitations and the restraints around that bond and those characters' relationship with each other and their magic system is already kind of there. Whereas Star Wars has a completely different set of restraints, constraints, I should say, in that what a sorcerer can do in my story world is different from what a Jedi or a Dark Force user can do. And these characters, were less known to me. I could kind of unpack them in different ways. There is that subtext that maybe there might be something a little bit more there between them, whereas my characters are completely platonic. They're essentially siblings. These characters don't have that. So then what do they have? So that really connected me with those characters, and I could see how it really, gave the that fandom a lot of new source material to play with as well. So I don't know whether that answered your question, but that's what it reminded me of.
There have been quite a few fan fiction books that have been, well, fan fictions that have been adapted. So, I mean, the most obvious one that I can think of is The Love Hypothesis by is Ali Hazelwood? Is
Yeah.
that the author? And there have been a few others that I've seen that have dabbled with the same relationship. So, Kylo and Ray, and they tend to be in the romance sphere. At least what I've seen has
They're
been about
all
the
in the
romance
romance.
between the two. Yeah, but I wanted to ask you: have you heard of Point Pleasant
No.
by Jen Archer Wood? So that is a supernatural fan fiction that's been published.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was looking at quite like big fan fictions that have gone down the publishing route. I was like, you're also interested in supernatural, so I wonder if you've come across
Thank you.
that one, because the only things that I've really like known about has been Twilight, like Twilight fan fiction that has been made into movies and other adaptations. So I remember reading 50 Shades of Grey and being like, why? Why have I
And
done this
actually,
to
um,
myself?
a lot of members of fandom would probably say the same thing, like, why this one? Why was this one picked up when there's a lot of other work that we love as much or even more? Um, but there have been some really fascinating theories around that um, in in the reading that I've done in the academics sort of space. Um, one being that uh, there's a very clearly defined code of conduct within fandom around the line being drawn between writing for fandom's sake, for creativity's sake, as a hobby, for the love, and writing for, pardon me, for a commercial purpose. And for a lot of people in fandom, there is a belief that, or an understanding that we're using characters that were developed by other people. They are our interpretations of these characters, but we have borrowed them. We're playing with somebody else's toys, and so to take those toys back to Big W and try and sell them as ours, um, is for many people in fandom, it is an affront to what we're trying to achieve, what we're doing here. Not everyone takes that perspective. For others, like, they've put in just as much work into their fan fiction as they would into an original work, and they believe that they have, especially once they have made enough changes to kind of satisfy the requirement for original storytelling, that it is now completely theirs and it has removed itself enough from the source material, and that they should therefore be able to profit from it. I'm not going to say one way or another because it's a debate that's has been going on for a long time, will continue to go on for a long time, and there's not really a right or wrong answer. And also, the market shows that people will buy it, so they will read it if it's online for free, and they will read it if they have to buy it. They want to read it, so.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this ties into a question that Ryan had for you as well, which was how has the increased accessibility for self publishing and with the prominence of book influencers, so we've got BookTok and BookTube, changed fan fiction over time?
I think it's made it a lot more visible. Um, I think those lines that used to be very clearly drawn in the sand, especially in the 90s when um, fan fiction and fan art and fan sites were being directly contacted and threatened by uh, like 20th Century Fox and authors' legal teams. There's a lot of trauma carryover within the fandom, even for people who are newer to it, like myself, who weren't around for that time. There are a lot of behaviors, like self-protective behaviors, that keep fan fiction fandom closed off because of those experiences that kind of force them underground. So the visibility that comes from authors, the phrasing is filing off serial numbers, like getting rid of Kylo and Rey and turning them into these new characters, getting rid of the lightsabers and turning it into test tubes because now they're STEM students.
I was going to say, what was it in?
Yeah, they all have test tubes.
Because, yeah, all right.
um, the authors that do that, there is some pushback from the community because of the visibility that it brings to what people are just kind of trying to do for themselves quietly underground, and what used to be something that people did in the shadows and was not talked about, and everyone had a like an internet handle. This was in a time when, like, you didn't tell people your real name on the internet. Like, what is wrong with you? The internet is just this big unknown scary place, Whereas
I
now
feel
with
like we could
Glow,
argue that that's still a safer practice.
it is still a very good idea, but it is
Still
not
a
the
safe
culture.
practice.
Yes, it's no longer the culture. The culture has shifted to one where it's very normal to have. Well, for myself, as a parent of a young child, I do have a lot of suggestions of parenting things come up, and a lot of it is people with their young children making reels, multiple a week, putting their kids' faces on the internet. That's something that wouldn't have probably occurred to people in the 90s when they were first encountering the internet, especially not as a good idea. And whether it is a good idea, maybe you kind of read from my tone how I feel about it, but that's how I feel about it with my family. Each to their own, but we will find out what the result of that is later on. Um, yeah, so there's a lot more blur between the personal life and the public life. Probably public in like inverted commas, because what people put out there to be public is maybe less authentic than even some of what we would have encountered in fanfiction communities back in the 90s under fake names. A lot of those people are still friends with the people that they connected with back then, and we're able to have authentic and meaningful connections with other readers and writers about their love of the source material, about their love of writing, and about their writing in both narrative sense, but also in a technical sense, and be able to improve as writers and um, think more deeply about their stories and about the stories that they're watching as well. So yeah, to go back to your question about book talkers and that, I think that it's kind of bringing everything together, and it's now possible to be a fan fiction writer and a face on Book Talk and a traditional author, and to have your name plastered and your life plastered across all of those identities.
Yeah, the rise of social media has definitely been something. And, we're both in our 30s and we've seen, I guess, the rise and fall of many a social media platform and the ones that have stuck. And TikTok seemed to have opened a completely new market to the younger generation, so Gen Z in particular, and showing us that there are markets for things like fan fiction and publishing works within those fandoms, which is kind of neat. Like it's always a two-edged sword, right? It's kind of neat that we are able to get younger people or maybe just different audiences into something that we grew up with and we think is cool. That we're seeing like talks of a Buffy reboot happening and everyone's like super excited about that, and maybe that'll bring in a new generation. And even like Sarah Michelle Gellar's like, if we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it right. So bear with this. It's not going to be a quick thing. And I think like our generation is like, yes, you do that. You make sure that it's correct because we were right if it is not,
Yeah.
growing up with that sort of thing. But then it has the opportunity to bring in a younger audience, and I think there's been a real trend, and this is sort of going off fan fiction so much and sort of in terms of writing, but we're seeing a real trend of reboots happening with younger casts in the TV show and the movie sphere, which I would sort of liken to fan fiction, being like, we knew this thing was popular, and correct me if you think I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We knew this thing was popular. It has an audience. We want to bring a new audience to it, so we'll reboot it. And we're getting less, I guess, original ideas, but we're using a format and an audience that is in place to make money.
Yes, that's the part that I was going to agree with, that I was going to add. Yeah, I think that's the real demarcation, like the real difference between what we're seeing in media and what we're seeing in fan fiction, is that fan fiction in the academic literature um, gets alternatively referred to as either derivative work or transformative work, depending on whether they're taking a negative or positive viewpoint on it. And personally, just from like that description, I feel that a lot of these reboots are more derivative than some of the fan fiction that we see. Taking something that we know was successful and kind of recoding it with new buzzwords, new younger actors, and throwing it back to the same audience doesn't generally have a very high success rate. I feel they're like being someone who engages with fandom and with fan discourse. They don't tend to run very long as television series. Not all of them, but for the most part, they're not really transforming or adding something new. They're just giving it a facelift and often taking away the elements that the core fandom most loved about
That's
about that
such a good
TV show.
point. They're
Yeah. Whereas fan
not
fiction is
adding
the opposite.
originality to it.
Yeah, fan fiction might take the end point or a scene that was never produced or whatever, something that the writer wanted to take, and then we'll create something new with that. So in the episode of Supernatural, Sam and Dean have a big argument. They both hop in the car, they slam the doors. Next, we cut. The next scene, they're walking into a bar, ready to like take on a vampire or whatever. Well, we also know that there was 6 hours between when they hopped in the car arguing and when they arrived. What happened? We will just never know, based if we just, wait for the television show, whereas the fan fiction will unpack and take that in so many different directions. There's so much potential there. And then what you get is something new that, first of all, didn't exist before, but transforms and adds something new that the audience wanted because the audience created it. The audience took it and then made something new and produced it for the audience, who then gave their feedback to it, which being in this online real time format means that we can take that feedback that is given by reviewers within the first 24 hours and then upload a new version if it turns out that our story has continuity error or something else that fandom doesn't like. You can just respond and just change it. And now we have the story that the audience actually wanted. Also, they're not doing it to try and make money off everybody. So I think that there's something that needs to be said about that. When you're creating art, what are you actually creating it for?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So, fan fiction is exactly what it says. It is for the fans of particular works. And it was interesting to hear the differences between that transformative and diminutive, probably pronounced that incorrectly, where people are like, I love this thing, I want to know more about it, that hasn't been done, therefore I'll create it. And that power is with me as a fan of something else rather than just a copy paste, which I feel personally that we're seeing a lot of in,
Yeah.
TV and movies and things like that. But that was fan fiction. So we've been here for about an hour now, so we'll close off. Thank you so much, Shayla, for joining me today and talking a little bit about your experiences. It's the first guest star, so welcome to the Genre Blender podcast. It was awesome to have a guest star on, which is really cool. I will just do a remind for people: we are giving away a copy of Mythos Unbound. By Shayla, and yes, it's beautiful up on the shelf there. So if you do want to enter, please make sure you are subscribed to whatever platform that you listen to, so whether that be YouTube, Spotify, or Apple, and make sure you're answering the question, what is your favorite fandom, down in the comments of these whatever platform that you are listening or watching on. So we should be announcing that one in the next fortnight or so. So Shayla, can you just let our audience know where they can find you if they want to know more about your works?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and TikTok as Shayla Writes Magic, on Facebook as Shayla Morgansen Author, and I have a website, shaylamorgansen.com, where you can get hold of copies of the book if you're in Australia, or there are links there to Amazon if you want to read on Kindle or get hold of an international copy.
To watch videos of Genre Blender or the podcast, head on over to Genre Blender Podcast on YouTube. The audio-only version is available on Apple and Spotify, or a podcast app of your choice. You will find all the show notes in the description below, including links to Shayla's books and the websites just mentioned. You can follow us over at Genre Blender Podcast on Instagram and TikTok for clips of the show, or visit genreblenderpodcast.com for all our social media links across the web. If you'd like more from me, I'm over at A Fictional Escapist on YouTube, Instagram, and Blue Sky, and Ryan, who is unfortunately not able to be here today, is over at Ryan.Fanfiction Floyd on Instagram and ryanfloyd.com on Blue Sky. To all our world hoppers out there, we wish you safe travels, and we will catch you in the next episode where Ryan and I will be talking about the anti-TBR tag. So until then, ciao.